Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first webinar by Access Coalition on energy access, how civil society can promote productive uses. My name is Ranisha Basnet, and I will be moderating this webinar along with my colleague Johanna Hartmann from Energypedia. Before we begin, a small tip. On the right side of your screen, you could see a small box called questions. Please use this box to send us all your questions. We are trying to make this webinar as interactive as possible, so we'll try to answer all of your questions at least during the webinar, and if not, at least documented after the webinar. And in case you cannot see the question box on your right side, there should be an orange icon. If you click on that icon, then it will expand into a box. After the organizational structure, a short tip about the organizer. This webinar is organized by the Access Coalition, which is a group of civil society organizations and practitioners working in the energy access sector. We will talk more about the organizer in the later part of the webinar. So let's kickstart the webinar. So we want to know a bit about you. So there should be a poll popping up on your screen that says, are you a member of the Access Coalition? Please use this option to tell us, yes, I'm a member, no, I'm not yet a member, and no, I do not work for a CSO. So now we will close the webinar in about 2 seconds and then display the results. So now we'll close the webinar and display it. Superb. So we have most of our people who are not part of the Access Coalition. We hope that this webinar will help you to understand more of the coalition so that you, if you want to be part of it, you could easily become a part of it. Now we'll launch one more poll on the screen, and you should see a second question popping up on your screen. So please tell us, what kind of organization do you work for? Is it a social enterprise, a civil society organization, or a research institute? We will leave the poll for, again, 2 more seconds. And now we'll close it and display the results. Superb. So we have we have a like even distribution with 33% from civil society, so the same from social enterprise and research institutions. Thank you. Now, after the short introduction and the poll, now we'll dive deeper into the presentation. And I would like to invite my first presenter. Her name is Jacqueline Kimmo. She's the coordinator for the Access Coalition. And now she's going to talk in detail about what is Access Coalition and its strategy for the upcoming years. And Jacqueline, the floor is yours. You should now be unmuted.
Thank you very much, Ranisha, for the introduction.
Jacqueline, could you say something?
Sorry?
It's fine, just continue.
Okay, thank you very much, Ranisha, for the introduction. And happy to meet everyone on this webinar. My name is Jacqueline Kimmo. I'm the coordinator for Access Coalition. And I'll talk briefly about our strategy for 2019-2021. And my presentation will be in threefold. I'll talk about the background. I'll also talk about the advocacy priorities for Access Coalition, and also I'll talk about the governance structure. For Access, as many of you know, is a global coalition of around 65 organizations who work at local, national, regional, and international levels, advancing energy access issues across the globe. Access was founded in 2014, and we have a strong representation of NGOs and CSOs, in addition to international NGOs who have work in Africa and beyond. To mention that most of our members are based in Africa or have work in Africa. And as you can see, our mission is to advocate for people living in poverty to have access to safe and reliable, affordable energy. Next. Ranisha, next. Okay, our priorities for 2019 Please go to the previous slide, please. Thank you. We have three main work streams that we are really focusing on in advancing our mission. First of all, we are engaging with the African Development Bank and also other development banks. The reason why we have this as our priority is because, as you all are aware, that African Development Bank have a very ambitious strategy for increasing energy access in Africa and targeting to reach over 30 million people with decentralized energy options. So what are we as Access doing in this space? We are working with the bank to increase investment in energy access, specifically in DRE and also clean cooking. Given that the challenge that we have is the actors have a limited understanding on the role that DRE can play in advancing or enabling access to clean energy. And then we also having and influencing CSO participation in planning and investment decisions by the bank. For example, in Africa, we are engaging with countries in the process of developing country strategy papers so that we can have energy included as a priority in the plans and specifically looking at the decentralized energy options. And we also have another advocacy priority that is SDG 7 implementation. Again, we're also looking to advocate for inclusive and energy planning in decision making in regards to SDG 7. We understand that as CSOs, as non-state actors, we have a role to play in contributing to the decisions that are being made and also sitting in the decision-making panels and programs. Then we also have, we are looking at maximizing the development impacts of last mile, looking at energy nexus issues, what can energy do for the other sectors. We're also really pioneering and influencing prioritization of energy nexus issues in SDG 7. And then the last one is knowledge and capacity building and the Access Learning Group that has really organized this webinar. We are looking to enhance collaboration and coordination of CSOs to share best practices in energy access space and also provide high quality knowledge technical assistance through North-South collaboration. And then we're also looking at increasing and also contribution of CSO in global decision-making processes. Next, please. Just to emphasize on the role of the learning group, which has really put together this webinar. And as you can see, we have the values and the action that we are doing, and also the value addition that we are adding to the energy space, looking at the various actions that we have listed in the chart that you can see. Bridging knowledge gap, delivering expert technical service facility, and so others as well. I'll be able to share this after the presentation for more information. Next, please. The structure, I'm just going to emphasize on them. We are currently working to recruit 3 regional coordination organizations in Africa, looking at West, Southern, and Eastern. And then we also have a coordination group and a board that advises the coalition, composed of 10 to 12 representatives, including who are members of Access, either from INGOs or regional CSOs, also national. Next, please. Yeah, and you can see our membership base. We have, as I mentioned, we have over 65 members. Not all members have been included in this, but we are hoping and we welcome all of you to join us so that we can work together in advancing the energy access space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for those valuable insights into the strategy of the Access Coalition within the next few years. We are really excited to be part of it. The learning group, within the learning group, we want to build skills, capacities, and learning for civil society organizations, by civil society organizations. The learning group is a knowledge aggregator of expert advice and energy access, and we want to re-strengthen the capacities of CSOs. We are an open group within the Access Coalition. We cooperate and coordinate with Jacqueline and with the soon-to-be regional coordinators. And our group is based of volunteer basis. Everybody can join, so we are happy if you want to join our next call. And we are a group of organizations with decades of experience in varying aspects. For example, Visions from the Wuppertal Institute, IED, GERES, KCCWG, or Practical Action. And how do we do that is what Jacqueline already presented. So if you have any insights into the three main areas that we identified, ergo research, the knowledge brokering facility, or fostering partnerships, please let us know if you have any ideas on how to elaborate on that. Contact us if you want to join our next call or have any ideas. So during the consultations with the Access Coalition members, productive uses always stood out as a topic of interest. And that's why we made this first webinar all about presenting best practices on this topic. And before Julia from Visions get us started with a short introduction based on their research, we kindly ask you to let us know how much you already know about productive uses. So if everybody could please select one grade now, how they feel informed about productive use at the moment. We really appreciate that. And we will close the poll .
Thank you, Johanna. So now a quick look at the poll results. So most of you say you're in between. So we hope this webinar is useful to everybody who's either an expert or we are just starting with the productive end use activities. And now I will just close the poll. So now, since we talked, Johanna introduced the productive end use topic. Now I would like to introduce my another presenter. Her name is Julia. She's working as a project coordinator at the Wuppertal Institute. And today, Julia is going to talk about what are the impacts of productive end use and tell us more about the impact pathway. Julia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to give a brief snapshot on our research on productive use during this webinar. And I always like to start with this cartoon because with small-scale energy projects, there are a lot of expectations connected. So the access to energy is expected to bring economic and social development and ultimately lead to the sustainable development. But in the reality, the evidence on how much development small-scale energy projects really can bring is limited. And we have a lot of projects where we see that access to energy does not lead automatically to the productive use of energy. So we should look a bit more into detail what happened in between the access to energy and the expectations in regard to sustainable development. And because currently this expectation is there, and then we hope that the miracle occurs, but I think we should be more explicit here in looking why and how things happen to establish productive use, and then which hopefully leads to social and economic development. And what we did within the Visions project, we did an evaluation of 30 small-scale projects supported by Visions and analyzed their impact pathways and gathered evidence from these impact evaluation and the literature on the impact pathways from access to energy to positive livelihood impact. And next, please, Nisha. As you can see on the left side, the access to energy is only a very small part of the whole concept of establishing productive use. What we found is that you need a lot of other aspects or factors complementary to the sole access of energy, like facilitating access to capital and financial services, not only for the energy technology, but also for the additional productive use activities. You need capacity building, especially for the productive activities like technical skills, management skills, business skills. And what we also found what is really important is to raise the awareness of market opportunities and business opportunities. So what can really be done? Because in the local settings where our small scale projects are based, many people don't have these information available to them. And then hopefully we have the development of the development of either improved productive activities. Could you please go back one slide? Or the development of new productive activities, which then potentially lead to new employment or increased income, or also increased availability of goods at the local level, and which then hopefully lead to positive impacts. But if you see all these links in this theory of change, all links are connected to certain risks or that the underlying assumptions don't hold true. So there are a lot of intersections where things can go wrong, and in the end we don't have the establishment of productive use, or we don't have the positive impact associated with the productive use of energy. And from just to give a short overview of the results from our impact evaluation, now we can go to the next slide. What we found was that capacity building activities should definitely address the productive use and the business activities, not only the energy system, that financing options need not only to be available but accessible, because often they are available but not really accessible for a small scale entrepreneur at a local level. That market information assessments need to include the subsequent value chain, not only that there is a demand for example, a product, but also how to get it to the market and to look at how much the customers are really willing to pay for such a product. Then that the productive activity should be planned with the energy project and not just expected to develop independently with the access to energy, but to be already an integrated part of the planning for the energy project. That we found also that employment can be created, but it's also important to look at the type of work, and that not existing jobs are replaced. And there's also always a very high risk for trained people to leave to better jobs. So the capacity building should address a group of people, not be focused only on a few individuals, because if they leave for better job opportunities, then the productive use might be suspended. And productive activities do not necessarily increase the incomes of the entrepreneurs, but they diversify often the income sources and they reduce the workload. And also the changes we found in our impact evaluation were often rather small. These changes were still perceived as substantial by the beneficiaries. So this is just a short overview about our research findings, which are also available in the paper if you're interested in more details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia, for the short and comprehensive introduction, and also showing us what are the precursors that we need for actually promoting the productive end use. I'm pretty sure our listeners find it interesting, and to all our listeners, we will document all of this information on Energypedia so that you can have access to all these amazing slides that Julia just presented. And in the meantime, please feel free to use the chat box, the question box, to send us all of your questions. Now, I would like to dive deeper into our case studies and present our speaker, Emma, who is the Senior Energy Advisor at Practical Action. Emma is today going to talk about her experience with the green mini-grid facility in Kenya and implementing ice making and milling as a productive end-use activity. Emma, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. All right, I think you can go to the next slide, please. So we know that productive uses of energy matter. Productive uses can enable rural development, improving incomes and creating jobs, and it can be an effective tool to increase energy demand. But it's complex, it takes time, and it doesn't happen organically, and Julia made this point as well. It's often assumed that productive uses of energy happens by itself, but time and time again this is proven not to be true. Energy providers need to play an active role because there are other barriers around finance and capacity and market linkages and so on that need to be understood and addressed. But too often, productive uses are an afterthought, and energy providers will try to retrofit productive applications into existing energy systems, but this is really hard to do effectively. Next slide, please. So because energy access is only a very small part of the picture when it comes to productive uses, CSOs do bring really important capabilities to enabling and driving productive uses in a community. So first of all, CSOs have local expertise. That means they understand the system and value chains. For many communities, the starting point when thinking about productive uses is looking at what are the existing products and services and activities in a community, and then how can value be added to those activities through the supply of electricity. Secondly, CSOs often have a long-term presence in a community, which means that they can provide the ongoing support and complementary interventions that are necessary to ensure that productive use activities are sustainable. Thirdly, CSOs can leverage their community engagement and mobilization experience to raise awareness in the community of what the opportunities are for productive use activities. They can support entrepreneurs to manage productive use businesses and help ensure that communities are bought in to productive use activities. CSOs have experience with capacity building and training to support entrepreneurs in managing sustainable productive use businesses. They also have experience with facilitating and managing partnerships with diverse stakeholders. And partnerships are really key to success with most productive use activities. So whether that's equipment providers or financial intermediaries or extension service providers or business development service providers, most productive use activities will not succeed without effective partnerships, which CSOs are well placed to facilitate. And finally, CSOs have good expertise in monitoring and evaluation and learning, which can ensure that success can be measured and impacts tracked and lessons learnt. Next slide. So there are three types of productive use activities, and CSOs play a pretty important role in enabling and driving all of these. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the difference between these types of activities. So first of all, cottage industries are basically small business opportunities for individual entrepreneurs. So common examples include things like saloons and barbershops, village cinemas, juice making businesses, welding businesses, and so on. The good thing about cottage industries is that they leverage existing skills in a community and they can enable job creation and income generation. But what they also do is often just recycle income within a community because the businesses are being used by community members. So it's not really bringing any additional value into a community. And because they're very small businesses, these type of industries are also unlikely to have a big impact on energy usage. Clearly, there's a key role for CSOs in these types of productive use activities in identifying and recruiting and training entrepreneurs. And that training needs to be both in terms of technical and business skills and providing ongoing mentoring and support. The second type of productive use activity is developer-operated industries. So this is where energy providers choose to set up their own productive use businesses that rely on power from their energy system. So one example is the Jumimi microgrid in Tanzania, which is milling maize to produce flour to then sell to the local community. And they also have their own freezers to make ice to preserve fish, which they sell to the local fishermen, and they also use the ice to support their own tilapia fishing business. So these types of industries give an energy provider an additional source of revenue, and to some extent it gives them control over energy demand. But it's also often outside the core business and technical expertise of an energy provider to set up these types of businesses. And there are some risks with these industries that benefits and income flow to the energy provider rather than to the community. And so again, this makes the role of CSOs really important to ensure that these types of industries are needs-based, so grounded in what the community actually needs, and that the community is engaged effectively and doesn't become dependent on the developer, not just for their energy supply, but for the other services that the developer is providing. The third type of productive use activity is market-enabled industries. So these are productive use activities that tap into existing value chains and facilitate improved market linkages so that people can sell new products or more products or better quality products externally. And therefore, they're bringing additional value into the community. So one example is cold storage, which enables smallholder farmers to preserve their milk and their produce so that they can sell those products externally at better prices. So these types of industries can have significant long-term impact for a whole community, not just for individuals within a community. And they can also have quite significant impact on energy demand. But these types of industries are complex to identify and to set up. They require a deep understanding of local systems and value chains, and they're very dependent on partnerships to succeed. And all of these are reasons why the role of CSOs is so essential in enabling these types of industries. This third type of activity is what's most interesting for us at Practical Action, as we see it's the most likely to produce sustainable businesses that can be transformative for local communities in the long term. And it's this type of productive use activity that we've focused on most heavily, including through our work with the Green Mini Grid facility in Kenya, which I'm going to talk a bit about now. So next slide, please. So the Green Mini Grid facility is funded by DFID and by AFD, and it was set up in 2017. The facility provides technical assistance to individual companies, it provides technical assistance to the broader sector, and it provides grant funding. And the purpose of the facility is to support mini-grid electrification in remote Kenya. So at Practical Action, we're part of the managing entity of this facility, and we do a lot of work around productive uses. I think the most interesting piece of work we've done through the facility is building 2 practitioner guides on productive uses of energy, including one that's highlighted here on ice making for fish preservation. So the purpose of this guide is really to help you as a practitioner to assess whether an ice making application is viable for your specific context, and if it is, the guide provides a set of tools that can help you to bring that productive use application to life. So we developed this guide alongside private mini-grid developers in Kenya, so it is grounded in real-world situations and not in hypotheticals. And what I want to do is talk you through what this guide looks like and some of the kind of complexities that you can see emerging through the productive use applications that are assessed in these guides. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the guide is organized as a series of tools to help practitioners, and the first tool is basically an initial screening to arrive at a go, no-go decision on whether or not to pursue ice making as a potential productive use activity. So the checklist highlights minimum conditions that have to be met in order for an ice making application to succeed, key data that needs to be collected, and what unit economics really need to be in place for an ice making business to be successful. And a really important part of this checklist is doing a systems map. And if you go to the next slide, here's a simplified example of a systems map that we developed for fishing communities on islands in the Lake Victoria region. And I'm not going to go through this with you in detail, but this just shows the value chain from inputs all the way through to distribution and sales, and the roles of each actor at each stage of that value chain. We also looked at the linkages between these different actors and some of the assumptions that were underpinning that system. So next slide, please. So I just want to highlight why system mapping is such an important part of assessing the feasibility of a productive use application. So on the face of it, it looked like there was a huge opportunity for ice making in Lake Victoria. So we know that cold storage and ice making is essential for fish preservation. There are about 300 fish landing sites on the islands in Lake Victoria that don't have cold storage facilities, which means that ice needs to be transported from the mainland, which is very expensive, and we were hearing many reports about fish spoiling. In addition, demand for fish in Kenya is increasing, food safety is becoming more regulated. So all of these factors pointed to an increasing demand for ice and a really big need for a cold chain. So using data, we estimated that 80 new ice making plants were necessary to meet the ice needs of fishing communities in Lake Victoria. Can you go back a slide, please? And go back one more slide, please. And back. Yep, thanks. So on the face of it, a huge opportunity. But when we did a systems map to understand the key actors and linkages and assumptions, we found that there were some hidden factors, and that meant that demand for ice was actually more limited than it looked at face value. So for example, there is a huge market even for very, very poor quality fish, which is used as smoked or dried fish and sold to local fishmongers. And that means that there really aren't very many losses from a lack of ice. Another example is that because local fishers live very much hand to mouth, it's very much a subsistence economy, and that means it's very hard for them to hold on to fish beyond the catch day to wait for better prices without going hungry, and that's even if cold storage is in fact available. So those types of hidden factors basically showed us that demand for ice was less than what we'd originally expected and projected. And what that means is that additional interventions are necessary. It's not enough just to provide energy access and build an ice making facility in order to make that application viable and generate impact. So for example, what you might need to do is provide training to fishers and to community leaders to show them what the benefits are of improved handling and cold storage. You might need to support fishing communities to aggregate so that they can increase their leverage over purchases. And generally it's CSOs who are best placed to play this kind of role and support these type of interventions in a community. But if you don't do the system mapping at the first step, you don't know that these are gaps and that they need to be addressed. Next slide, please. So the second tool in the practitioner guide is business model guidance. And the purpose of this tool is to help figure out, well, what is the most appropriate model for a ice making productive use application? So for example, is there an existing ice making machine already that just needs to be upgraded and connected to the mini grid? Because that's a very different story to working with an individual or a group to set up a brand new ice making enterprise. We also need to think about the different ownership, governance and partnership structures that are possible. An ice making facility could be owned by a community group, by an individual entrepreneur in a community. It could be owned by a commercial company or by an NGO or by an energy provider. And that ownership can transition over time. So assessing which of these structures will be most appropriate and then facilitating the setup of that structure requires a very deep understanding of community needs and interests and politics and ongoing support through a local presence, which again is where CSOs play a very important role. Next slide, please. So I'll just briefly touch on the last three tools. So tool number 3 of the guide looks at the technical considerations. So how do you integrate an ice making productive use application with a mini grid? And how can the mini grid provide sufficient power to meet demand of the ice machine at all times? Tool 4 is a plug and play financial model, which basically helps you figure out, is this application financially viable, both from the perspective of the energy provider and from the perspective of whoever owns the ice making facility. And then finally, tool 5 is step-by-step guidance around monitoring and evaluation to develop a theory of change, key indicators, data collection tools and processes, and so on. And CSOs do play a really important role here. Energy providers often require support with M&E because their focus tends to be on tracking operations and efficiency rather than community impact. So this guide, as well as a guide for milling as a productive application, are now available online on the GMG facility website. So I would encourage you to go and take a look at those guides in more detail. And I think that is my final slide. So thank you very much for your time, and feel free to get in touch if you have any other questions.
Thank you, Emma. That was a comprehensive representation of the sector, and I really like what you highlighted, that yes, productive end use, we expect it to organically spurge once we have energy access activities, but like you mentioned, it does not. And we have to work on precursors, the access to finance, training, to make sure that there is a successful productive end use activity in the target community. Now I would like to dive deeper with our second presentation. And our second presenter is Shadrach. He's the program manager for renewable energy at the Rainforest Alliance. And today he's going to talk about how brigades can be used in tea industry to increase the income as well as energy efficiency in Kenya. Shadrach, the floor is yours.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Shadrach, and I'm glad to be making this presentation today on use of briquettes in the tea industry. I come from Rainforest Alliance, where I work as the program manager for renewable energy. And we are implementing a project called Empowering Rural Communities and Households with Renewable Energy. I'm making this presentation when Kenya is the largest exporter of black tea and the third largest producer of tea after China and India. And as you all know, tea is heavily dependent on energy, and in this case, biomass energy for processing, particularly for ethering and drying, and of course to run machines. And in the country, a research done by RA in this project, a baseline, it revealed that each factory consumes up to 54,000 trees per year. And with over 115 tea factories in the country, you can be able to do the maths, and you'll realize we consume over 4 million trees annually in the country for tea processing. We would like to change this narrative by replacing or providing an alternative fuel for tea processing. And in this case, we are running a project which is aimed at changing minds of tea producers into shifting partially, not 100% at the moment, but partial shift of firewood use, replacing it with biomass briquettes. In tea production process, the cost of producing tea, 30% is as a result of buying energy, which 85% of this is firewood. And with the recent ban in logging in the country, it escalated the price of buying this fuel wood. And that means the cost of production in tea industry went up. We are not only targeting tea factories, but the entire tea landscape, including farmers, what farmers use in their households, and what tea industries, factories, use in processing tea. Next slide. So the project aims at catalyzing partial switch from use of firewood to biomass briquettes in factories, households, and also in institutions around tea landscapes. We are working in Muranga County, but we're also hoping to expand to the neighboring counties, including Nyeri County and Kiambu, with up to 30% switch. We target to impact on 12 factories, saving at least 82,500 trees annually. This project is supported by IKEA Foundation and is running through to June 2021. Next. The project has got two components because, as I said, we are not only targeting tea factories but also households. So we have a component targeting use of renewable energy technologies, which is improved cook stoves, solar devices, and household briquettes. So we have one component which is targeting the households, and we're going to do this through what we call household energy centers. And we have another component aiming at impacting on the tea factories and catalyzing the switch.
Chandrak, I think we lost you somewhere, your voice. Oh, so it says he's offline, so I think he's trying to get back on the internet. So I'd say let's wait for 1 or 2 minutes to see that he's online again. I think there could be a technical or a internet failure on his side. So we're gonna wait 1 more minute to try to get him back on the track. In case we are not able to get him back online, we will move on with the other presentation, and once he's back online, we will then continue with this presentation. So it seems like we cannot get him back. So we will now then continue with the other part of the presentation. Or sorry, just a second. I think he's back on the line. Chandrak, are you back on the line? Yes.
Yes, I am.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. So we could continue from the presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's regretted. Just a moment. Yes, so as I was saying, the project will also mitigate in greenhouse gas emission in tea factories and cut the cost of production of tea. And that means the margins for these factories will go up. And that again will directly mean the profit for farmers will go up. Yeah, you will realize that tea factories pay farmers their annual bonuses based on the profitability of those tea factories. And by cutting on the cost of production through use of cheaper and clean energy sources, you increase their margins, and that directly means farmers will gain a lot in terms of bonuses annually. And we create employment in the process because we have these HECs, household energy centers, and the centralized production facility that will create employment to the locals, either through production of these briquettes or by providing raw materials for producing the briquettes. We are partnering with Enso Impact and KTDA Foundation in this project. Next. So our approach is to work with existing and new entrepreneurs locally. We are working with communities, individuals who have interest in doing energy businesses. We are mentoring new, but we are also supporting the ones who are existing in establishing the household energy centers And as I said, we'll work with 12 tea factories in 12 tea zones. ATDA has divided their operation areas into 12 zones, and we like to have one factory per zone to pilot this shift from use of firewood to briquettes, so that the rest of the factories, back a little bit, yes, the rest of the factories can learn from these pilot factories and perhaps implement the shift in their own factories. We'll work with, apart from establishing our own briquette production facility, we'll work with existing commercial producers. We'll check on their quantities and qualities to ensure a sustainable supply. And eventually, we'll have these factories to sign a long-term supply agreement with the producers. We'll carry out trainings on briquette handling. I mean, how do you fire with briquettes is a bit different from the way you fire with ordinary firewood. How do you transport briquettes? How do you store briquettes? We'll carry out trainings which will be on-site at factory level. We'll also do trainings on how to produce quality briquettes as required by KTDA. Quality briquettes, I mean, we'll be looking at their calorific values, their moisture contents, because KTDA have got standards on how much, or I mean, the quality of biomass fuel that should be used in tea processing. And of course, we'll carry out continuous support to HEC operators, these entrepreneurs, on entrepreneurial skills, marketing, branding, financial management, and so forth. You realize that doing or carrying out an energy business is not like any other ordinary business, and we will endeavor to carry out a lot of trainings on entrepreneurships, because we want this thing to be sustainable, this kind of model to be sustainable and to carry on, to continue long after the project comes to an end. So you like to have the skills to be retained by the factories, the boiler operators, and also by the operators of household energy centers. Next. Those are our expected outcomes and outputs. 10 HECs to be established and to be profitable. To have at least 10 commercial briquette producers who will have passed the test for producing quality briquettes. And to see that we have the initial delivery of briquettes at factories. As I said, continuous on-site training of briquette handling, and eventually reduction in use of firewood by 30%, and reduction in cost of processing tea, meaning higher profit margins for tea factories and better bonuses for farmers. Next. Work done so far, we've established 7 HECs. We've been able to disseminate through these HECs over 4,000 energy devices, both efficient cook stoves and solar household devices. We've been able to produce and sell over 4 tons of briquettes, household so far, and train and mentor renewable energy entrepreneurs. We also identified existing briquette producers. These are commercial, targeting the factories. We've nominated the participating factories, and we are in the process, advanced process actually, of negotiating with an investor to establish a centralized briquette producing facility. On the far right, you can see photos of the HECs we produced, we've mentored, we established. And next. Work remaining to be done is continuous quality testing and qualification of more briquette producers, on-site training on briquette handling, transportation, storage, firing, removing what you call clinker, and tackling challenges faced. And of course, continuous support for HEC. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadrak. Sorry, we had to hurry you a little bit as we are tight on time. And
Yes,
thank you for
yes,
showing us. Sure. And thank you for showing us that how brigades being used in cane and tea industries not only helps to reduce the cost for the tea industry, but at the same time also helps us to save the environment and achieve our SDG 7 goals. So now just one second. Now that we have talked a bit about the two of the presentations, I just wanted to quickly introduce you to one resource on Energypedia. So on my screen, you should now be able to see the page in the productive use portal on Energypedia. So basically, Energypedia is a platform where you can find free information on different topics, and one of them is productive use portal. And on this portal, you can now look at like different topics and sub-themes within productive use topics. We invite you to have a look at this portal, and if you think you have some resources that could be your publications, your articles that is related to this topic, we invite you to share it with us, and we'll feature it here. And these are just a snapshot of what is available on Energypedia. And if you go to all productive use articles, you can see everything, all the articles, publications that we have hosted. And now we would like to go to all the questions, because a lot of people are sending us questions. Quickly this page where we documented all the questions. So if you could see on my screen, I would actually begin with question number 2, because the reason I'm jumping questions is because some of the question has already been answered by my colleague in the background. So I'll be jump to question number 2, that is for Julia. So Julia, if you could give us examples in case in this productive use led to increased revenue and cases when it did not.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. One example, for example, where productive use, which was an improvement of an existing productive activity, led to increased revenues, was a case study in Pakistan, where they replaced diesel fuel generators by biogas for milk chilling, and they had substantial savings in terms of energy for this task, and they could increase their revenues from the milk selling. Example where it didn't really work out. I can't remember what they produced, but it was an thing maybe they used biogas to cook different products and sell it on the market, but then there was no link to bring the product to the market, and there was also not really, the people weren't willing to buy the new products. So this was an example where the market value chain wasn't considered and it didn't really work out. Just 2 examples, but there are more on our website, also positive as well as negative.
Thank you, Julia. We'll definitely share the link to your website so that people can check those examples. And now I'm again jumping to question number 5. And this question is, maybe Emma, you could address this question. And the question is, so actors who want to start new business, they are not homogeneous because they have different barriers to overcome. So how do you take this factor into account when you are enabling access to productive uses? So just a second, my colleague is just going to unmute your mic so that you can reply. And yes, now you should be unmuted. Emma, we cannot hear you. It's okay. Sorry. Now you're unmuted. Yes.
Still on mute. So thanks for the question. It's a good question, and I completely agree. So I think the key here is making sure that these factors are considered right from the beginning. So when you're in a community, working with that community to identify productive use activities or those activities that have potential to use energy productively, it's thinking about what are the different roles of men and women and various groups in those activities, and how will those activities affect men, women, and different groups differently. And if that thought is going in at the initial stage, then it's possible to then focus on those activities that have kind of the most impact on the groups that you're trying to target. And then once those activities are kind of up and running, then it's also about sort of the type of training and support that needs to be provided to various groups. So obviously, if you're working with women entrepreneurs, then you'll need to provide sort of slightly different training, and particularly around sort of leadership and confidence that you might not need to provide to male entrepreneurs. So thinking about how you tailor that training and that ongoing mentoring and support depending on your target group is also important. So really the key is just considering those factors upfront and working with the community to identify the most appropriate activities.
Thank you, Emma. Now I would again jump, sorry about jumping here and there, but now I'll jump to question number 4, and maybe both Emma and Sandra can answer this question, and Julia, if you feel like, please jump in as well. So the question is, how do you address the fact that when you train people, when they get better opportunities, they leave and go? So there is again a risk that you have trained a group of people, they leave, and then there is again no trained people to actually operate the system. So maybe Emma, you want to go first because you're already unmuted.
I might leave this one with Julia, if that's okay.
Okay, so Julia, so now you are unmuted. So if you would like to just jump in.
Yes, this is a difficult question. The only thing we always try to foster in the project we support is to have a capacity building that addresses a larger group of people. So their training is provided for more people than just one entrepreneur. But I think in many cases, it's unavoidable that some people might leave. And but this is also another point where the civil society organizations might come in, that if you have, or our partners we support, if they have regular contact with the project and the entrepreneur and provide continuous exchange and information capacity building, then this development might be foreseen, and someone can react and try to maybe train another person or bring another person into this kind of productive use. But it's a difficult task.
Definitely. Sandra, would you like to join in and give some input? And you should be also unmuted.
Well, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm responding to the issue of people trained and leaving for better opportunities. I believe we need to make the existing opportunities better than those better opportunities, so that we retain these individuals in the organizations.
Thank you, Sandra. Now for the question number 3, I'm going to throw it to the panelists. So feel free, so everyone from the panelists, to address this question. So the question is, from what capacity a system can be considered for productive use, and can a solar home system be used for productive use, and how? So if anybody wants to answer, please feel free to jump in. And all of you should be unmuted. So since I do not get a reply from any of my panelists, so maybe I could address this question, maybe the second half. Yes, our solar home system can be used as productive use. For example, in many African countries, you can have a solar home system and you offer mobile charging or offer some kind of recreational activities using, and that also depends on what is the capacity of your your solar home system. So the short and sweet answer would be yes, it can be. It depends on the solar home system, its capacity, and also what kind of need can you identify in your target community. Thank you. Now we go back to my presentation, and I promise you we're coming towards the end. And so towards the end, I would like to do one last poll, and this is to now I should. So there should be one poll popping up on your screen, and it would be great if you could tell us after this, the question that is after this webinar, my understanding what productive users of activity is, and so on. We'll leave the poll for 2 more seconds, and now we'll close it. And there, ladies and gentlemen, we come towards the end of the webinar. Thank you so much to the audience for actively taking part in the webinar. Thank you to the panelists for such amazing insights. And as you can see on the screen, you can always send us feedback at info@energypedia.info. You can find all the webinar presentations, the documents that Emma and the other presenters talked about. We'll put all the link there, and you also get all the link in the follow-up email. And as we close down the webinar, a survey will pop up. Please tell us, use this survey and tell us what other topics would you like us to make a webinar about, because this is for you guys. And if you tell us the topics, we can make webinars that exactly fit your needs. So now that's all for today. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.